Welcome to another Eat and Meet Career Information Session. I'm Andre Luck, PVCC's Career Services Manager, and today we're talking about the arts and humanities. My guests are Cristine Nardi, Executive Director of the Center for Nonprofit Excellence, or C&E, and Cristine directs strategy and operations for C&E. She counsels nonprofit staffs and boards on issues including governance, strategy, operations, and fund development. She also facilitates collaboration between nonprofits and community partners. She has a BA in English from UVA and a law degree from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And Kevin McFadden is the Chief Operating Officer of the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities. Kevin oversees planning and management of various programs. He's the former Associate Program Director of the Virginia Festival of the Book. He continues development of the Virginia Arts of the Book Center. He is also the author of Hardscrabble, a collection of poems, and he has a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from UVA. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. Let's start out by telling anyone who really doesn't know, what are the arts and what are the humanities, Kevin?
There's a long answer to that, and I'll try to condense it, but I think the humanities themselves are those disciplines which we think of maybe as the liberal arts, their religion, philosophy, literature. They tend to be open to interpretation. They ask questions. They don't necessarily have firm, harder answers as maybe the empirical disciplines do. But they put the human at a close proximity to the center of that whole equation. And so how we express ourselves as humans often is an art, literature, visual art, dance, performance. The humanities have been looked at as the ones that maybe ask the questions, give context to those sorts of activities. And so a lot of the things we think about or do with our time that we elect what we're doing are, at some level, I always think arts or humanities. We might want to go see a play or watch a movie or talk about something interesting we just read. Or maybe we read a book and want someone else to talk about it with. And we sometimes rely on people who invest themselves with a lot of time in those areas to kind of point the way, be a leader of a discussion or an instructor or a teacher. And so the humanities, I think, are at the heart of what we love about life. And that's just an area that always interested me. As I developed and went to school, I had a math aptitude, and I guess that came back to haunt me now that I work with the books and things like that where I am employed. But my passion was elsewhere. It was in those things that we think of as life.
And the arts are a part of the humanities.
I would say so. Art is a humanity, is what I've sometimes heard someone say. But we tend to think of them slightly differently, I think largely because our government has thought about them as two separate endowments. There's an endowment for the humanities and an endowment for the arts, and they define them a little differently in performing versus maybe arts of interpretation, and that's fine and viable. I think arts are important enough to have their own focus. But they're all part of the same. So quite often our lines blur between the arts and the humanities. It happens at our book festival, happens at our Arts of the Book Center. Our folk life often traditions are based in music or some sort of workmanship. So I think it's all related, but we can talk about them a little differently.
Okay. Cristine, what is the connection between nonprofits and the arts and humanities?
Thanks, Andre. And Kevin said that the arts and humanities essentially put humans at their core, and that really is a good definition of the nonprofit sector as well. And so What I would say is the connection between arts and humanities and the nonprofit sector is that nonprofits are, by definition, some of the greatest promoters, some of the greatest enthusiasts, some of the greatest supporters, and some of the greatest developers of activities in the arts and humanities, first and foremost. I would also say that arts and humanities are really critical to the strategic thinking that happens within the nonprofit sector. So if you're considering getting degrees in arts and humanities, that can be a really valuable tool to being involved in work that really puts humans at their core and thinks creatively about how to make human life better in our community and sometimes more broadly. And then thirdly, I would say that nonprofits really are the best representative of arts and humanities. Nonprofits often are the organizations, the entities through which you're able to see live music, through which you're able to experience arts and culture, through which you're able to understand your cultural heritage. Many of those activities, many of those institutions, many of those organizations are actually nonprofit organizations. So arts and humanities and nonprofits have a natural bond, a natural tie, and I think really are mirror images of each other.
I know that you both have a passion for what you do. Tell us how you got started in your profession.
So I got started when I graduated from college, I immediately went into the Peace Corps. And I was a Peace Corps volunteer for 2 years in Botswana in Southern Africa. And doing that really changed my worldview and changed my thinking about who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. And I've had that at my core ever since. And so I've always, since that experience, really focused on how can I have a job where I'm working to better the community, whatever that community may be. And so at the beginning, it was a Peace Corps volunteer working in Africa, and I was a teacher. And the reason that I was there is because in Botswana, they were just instituting a 12-year public education system. And they didn't have enough teachers yet, enough local teachers in order to fill the public education system. And so they brought Peace Corps volunteers in to be able to teach at different levels until they could train enough teachers to be able to fuel the public education system there. And I'm proud to say that now in Botswana, there isn't a teacher program because there are enough teachers there to be able to support the kids as they're growing and learning.
Very good. You were a pioneer.
Maybe so. But that's really how I got my start.
And when I was in school, writing is really what meant the most to me. Reading literature, creative writing, and I studied both of those while I was in college. And I had the real privilege of having a post-undergraduate granted year, a funded year. It was a small grant, but it helped me focus on writing. I got to move to San Francisco and just experience a different part of the world. I'd grown up in the Midwest, and it was great. I got to really give myself over to an art and pursue it. And I created a little bit of work that helped me with getting into a graduate school, and I went to the University of Virginia to pursue creative writing and just work with real masters of the art, Gregory Orr, Charles Wright, and Rita Dove. And so that was an intense exposure at, I think, the highest level to an art. And what did I do with it? Afterward, I was looking for opportunities. I really did like the community of Charlottesville, so I decided to stay and look for opportunities. And the book festival, which was already up and running, which is now a landmark of the Charlottesville, Albemarle, and really Virginia cultural landscape. I started in and just worked ground floor, and that's how I got started with the organization. After a while, I learned enough and learned some of its systems and financial aspects. When there was an opening, I moved up and threw that organization into the position I now inhabit. And really, it was that experience at the level of knowing how these programs work. You know, running them yourselves on the ground, knowing how they're funded, figuring out how you do it year after year. That was a place where I learned on the job how to do more refined aspects of the work. So it was, and I still look back at literature and just the ability to analyze and write. There's tons of reports that you have to do when you work in a nonprofit, and letting people know and communicating effectively about how you do your work. It's all been relevant over the years.
And I know you have many responsibilities and obligations. Can you tell us what type of skills are really, really helpful or necessary to have in your positions?
It's probably pretty similar, I would say, in both positions, but in my work in the nonprofit sector, really the skill that you need the most is critical thinking. You need to be able to communicate with others. You need to really be able to have one-on-one conversations, make decisions, and chart a plan forward. So critical thinking, being able to plan and execute, and really being able to build relationships, I would say. And that's not something you necessarily learn from books, but it's something that you learn from doing the hard work of being in school, sometimes having joint projects with others where you're having to build something together, and then going out in the world and figuring out how to apply it to what you're most interested in and what you're most passionate about. So that's what I would say.
I wholeheartedly agree. If you're at an organization that embraces creative thinkers, as our Foundation for the Humanities does, that puts just a lot of great ideas in the room. You learn from your colleagues a lot. I think at the heart of it, that critical thinking, someone who can grow into a position, not just be good technically at one aspect, but who can think about how to maybe improve a system or communicate effectively about it. That's what employers, I continually hear that in any sector when I'm talking to people. They want thinkers, not just somebody who has one trick down. They want you to be able to look at a larger picture, because that's how you will eventually develop and grow and be valuable to an organization, is helping it continue to do those things.
And you were both talking about the soft skills, critical thinking, being a thinker, organizational skills. And you really need to have those skills in order to make a positive impact in the community. Tell us what type of impact you think that CNE and the foundation are making in our community.
So CNE, for those of you who don't know, as Andre said, is the Center for Nonprofit Excellence. And essentially what we are is we're a community of practice, a resource hub for nonprofits all across the region. And what we do is largely behind the scenes. We focus on helping nonprofit businesses do their best work so they can have the most impact in the community. And so the uniqueness, I think, or the unique offering that CNE provides is giving nonprofit leaders, nonprofit staff members, and nonprofit board members, because nonprofits are really owned by the community, giving those who are invested in nonprofits the ability to come to a one-stop shop to really understand how to be effective in trying to accomplish the community goals that they have. So many people come to nonprofit work because they're really passionate about a particular issue area, and they don't necessarily know the business skills, frankly, that are needed in order to make the organization successful. One of the things that I always say is that a nonprofit is unique in that it has a double bottom line. It not only has to be effective in making community change, it also has to be a strong business. And so for both of those reasons, CNE plays a unique role in giving people a place to come to learn about those things.
The Virginia Foundation for the Humanities, while being the state's Humanities Council, every state has one, and some of the U.S. territories as well. They work in affiliation with the National Endowment for the Humanities. But also we work as a partner for the state of Virginia. We receive some funds from the Commonwealth of Virginia. We disperse them through our grants program and fellowships program to either organizations throughout the state. So our community is larger than even just the region we're physically headquartered in. And we have impacts, though, at that level. The community right here, the Virginia Festival of the Book that goes on, is this beacon for literature and literacy that we are blessed as a community, that it's embraced as widely as it is. It has hundreds of volunteers who help make it actually happen, and donors. And it comes together and is a celebration, and it's a celebration not just in the public for adults, but for schools. We have authors moving into the schools this year, as we have had every year, but we're coming up on 200 events that will be happening throughout the school community in the Charlottesville, Albemarle area, and that's amazing. Books can't slip out of the classroom. It's very easy with the many ways we're learning now to lose track of those sorts of things, but we want students to see an author interact, think about themselves as maybe someone with a story to tell. And that is a huge impact, just to give that sense of confidence to people who live in this community. But we do radio programs, and those reach statewide with good reason, has been going for more than 25 years. We're coming up on 10 years of work with Backstory, a national history program with the history guys, if you happen to be a public radio listener, or now if you are a podcast listener, we're moving into that format. So they go worldwide sometimes. So gauging that impact is actually one of the hardest parts of my job, to try to keep a track of how many people are using this resource, how effective is it being, how resourcefully are we approaching that work? Are we working with partners to get it out further? So I see a lot of impact. The hardest thing for me to do is to make sure that we're taking the steps to be sure everybody understands what that is and how far it goes.
And Andre, one of the connections that you might not have been aware of is that Virginia Foundation for the Humanities is a founding member of the Center for Nonprofit Excellence. And
No, I
so
didn't.
VFH, in addition to doing all the good work that it does, that Kevin mentioned, also was very supportive of having this kind of resource available in the community. And its current head was the first board chair.
No, I didn't know that. So you really have a long and wonderful history. That's good. Well, thank you for the contribution. So now we benefit by having both organizations in our community. And Kevin, you talked about Backstory and some of the other programs that you offer. But you offer so much more. I know that your tentacles are far-reaching. Can you tell us about a few of the other programs that you offer?
Our grants program is one that I think reaches so many communities. Maybe you have a museum or a community story to tell. It needs an exhibit, something that involves the humanities, either scholars. We will grant funds to help do that work. And that work is impossible to even encapsulate what 40 years of that impact has been. But a few stories that I will tell. Recently, we granted to a project that called itself the Human Computers Project. It was telling the story of the female scholars, calculators, and many of them African-American people who put forward the kind of numbers that helped the space program do what it did. You know this is not the Human Computers Program, but probably Hidden Figures. I see a poster right over there. You can see the movie.
It was an excellent film.
Excellent film, excellent book. To have been a part of the oral history gathering that helped Margot Lee Shetterly tell that story, we were just hugely proud to have been involved in it. But really, our job is often focusing on the talent that exists in the Commonwealth of Virginia and helping to give it a magnifying, a multiplying effect in getting that story out. And that's just a sensational one we can point to at this stage. And so we're looking forward to her appearing at the Virginia Festival of the Book this year. If you haven't gotten in and around to looking at that schedule, you should. But our folk life program is involved in the traditions of the Commonwealth, and the director of that program is a very wide and universal kind of look at what are the folk traditions of Virginia that have been here for hundreds of years, and what are the traditions that are just arriving. So we work with a lot of the immigrant communities and some of the beautiful ways that they express their culture. It could be mask making, Mongolian mask making. It could be a certain kind of Indian instrument, of which maybe people aren't very familiar here, but getting people together and sharing and expressing those sorts of things is really one of those ways that we capture, there's a bigger human story here. We love that moment. We love cultural exchange. So I think those are our hallmarks. All the while, what we're trying to do is give people context for understanding other people, other cultures, other ways to tell stories, and embrace thinking with a kind of humanities background in any given situation. It really can find its way, and there's no area of any human inquiry where there isn't a story to tell.
Now, Cristine, CNE has a huge member directory. Tell us about your focused areas and some of the programs and services you offer.
Sure. So CNE has a membership primarily of nonprofit organizations across the region, and they touch all different issue areas, and they also are, I say, all different shapes and sizes. They can be small, all-volunteer organizations, or they can be very large, like VFH, for example, very large, very experienced organizations. And what we try to do is we try to provide programs that service organizations across the life cycle. So whether you're a new organization or whether you're a 30-year-old organization, we want to make it more possible for you to do the kinds of things that Kevin has described. And so the programs that we develop really focus in 3 different areas. We focus on performance, helping nonprofits perform at their highest level because it's so important to the community. We focus on collaboration, making sure that nonprofits can work not just in their own lane, in their own organization, but also put their hand out and work with other nonprofits who may have similar missions, and also, frankly, in the public sector and the private sector, because the community problems that many of our nonprofits are trying to solve aren't just located in one area or in one sector. So we focus on advocacy, collaboration, and the third area is advocacy. And we make sure that people understand the nonprofit being and understand why it's important in the community. And so specific examples of that are, on the performance side, we have a program called Leadership Circles, where we bring nonprofit leaders together on a monthly basis in order to, the way that we describe it is to problem solve in real time. And so they're able to take up issues that they have in the day-to-day and work with their peers to problem solve so they can be more effective when they go back to the office. On the collaboration front, we're working now with a group of 5 different smaller environmental organizations who are focused primarily on conservation in the Shenandoah Valley. And what they want to do is figure out how to come together, maybe have a different structure, maybe merge, maybe have a different collaborative structure in order to have more impact on the issues that they're trying to address in conservation. So that's an example of the collaboration work that we do. And on the advocacy front, if you pay attention to the local news, for example, or if you read Charlottesville Tomorrow, one of the things that we're doing is, in partnership with Charlottesville Tomorrow, is we're highlighting a variety of different nonprofits in the community and the work that they do and the impact that they have, so that nonprofits aren't behind the scenes in building community, but they're front and center.
What would both of you say is the biggest challenge you face in your job or in your profession?
You want to take that one?
Well, I would say, given that the humanities themselves, as a word, that word's losing a little currency. People don't exactly know what is that humanitarian work. What are the humanities? I think has been a well-documented decline, or at least perceived decline, in the number of people pursuing humanities careers versus perhaps 20 or 50 years ago. And those are kind of arguable figures. I think there's about the same number as there has always been, but it's just there's a lot more out there. There are other disciplines to be interested in. And I think the challenge with the humanities is to find ways to talk simply, clearly, about how vital this is as a kind of makeup to the human being, and how daily the thoughts that we probably run right past, the decisions we make, what we find beautiful or worth our time, or who we love, or what is a good life? Like, these are the essential questions that at some point we're all asking, and these are the humanities are those ways to kind of get at that as close as we can. There's unfortunately not a simpler way to it, but then to ask questions, understand other humans, and think ourselves. And so coming up with a way to make that in our current culture, which really likes things in the sort of soundbite format. It's tough, but we're not giving up that fight either. I think it's so vital to be able to do that we're spending time right now as an organization thinking about that, and even how we brand our organization to be champions of that very way of life.
Go ahead.
And I would say from the perspective of the nonprofit sector as a whole, the greatest challenge is that in situations where nonprofits are needed the most, because nonprofits can be a support system for the community, often that's when there's the least support, there's the least funding, and so it's a paradox in a sense that when there is the need for more nonprofit activity in the community, oftentimes there's less funding and fewer resources in order to have that activity. And so helping individual nonprofits and the sector as a whole really manage that and still be effective with limited resources and keeping really good people and strong leaders in the sector is, I would say, the greatest structural challenge for CNE.
Well, no, you both touched on something. There's a decline in people majoring in the humanities, and Cristine, you mentioned how sometimes the funding is not available when it's really needed the most. And it seems like today there is a much stronger emphasis on STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And so students are really encouraged to get into STEM careers. We know that a few years ago that there's been less federal government support funding of the arts and the humanities. And we know that it's possible that public broadcasting may be privatized. Are the arts and humanities in crisis?
I think there are always threats if you're not in a space where you can define what it is you're doing and what its value is, the larger value is. And I think the humanities were probably at a disadvantage because for hundreds of years, this just was education. There was no other way to do it. So it didn't feel the need. It was self-evident as the necessary part of how we should look at education. And so that has changed, and that has created a bit of a crisis for the humanities, but there's I think, good news. One, STEM and humanities, I'd just like to make as a point, these are not mutually exclusive careers, pursuits. They have always worked together. I would say science actually emerged from philosophy. People who started thinking very critically and logically about what we know and how we understand the world was all one at one point. That was knowledge. That was science. And so it sort of emerged with different approaches. One that is focused strictly on evidence and what you can prove and repeat. That's science, and humanists love it too. But there's this other realm of experience that the humanities deal a little more squarely in. And so I don't like pitting them against each other, but we are in a space where right now there is a lot more federal funding that moves into science. You have to have a lab. You have to have things that, materials that cost a lot of money. So there's a certain amount of that is necessary. It might be a little less expensive to teach a history class or have a discussion about a piece of literature. So that's okay. I want to give everyone a sense with the humanities, however, that it does not condemn you to living with your parents for life. There are jobs. You're talking to two English majors, as we just heard. And in any business, as we mentioned, people want people who can think critically. And so it's never going to be a bad investment to do this. What has been the case is that, and this is well documented, at the outset, right out of the gates, maybe after your degree, you've gotten your degree and you're looking at the workforce, you probably will make less than somebody who pursued another discipline, maybe in the sciences. It is virtually certain. I can say that happened to me. Cristine, maybe that happened to you. And that's okay. You catch up. And you catch up fast. Your skills are still desirable and sharp, and it's just a matter of how you apply them in the workplace and finding your kind of niche. You catch up over time. This is the next part. They don't always show you this. They'll show you what you make right out of the gate going into college. Yeah, it's not going to be $60,000, maybe somewhere in the 20s or 30s at first. But by 10 years, check back in on that figure, and actually there are some studies that are showing a person with a background in the humanities is making a little bit more, and especially with an advanced degree in the humanities. So don't panic. I think the idea that that's somehow going to hobble you in making your way in the world is something that really is not as dire as it is sometimes stated. And so I love the idea of well-balanced people. I want to know about humanists who understand science and believe in science. I want to know about scientists who think, when I'm going to go beyond my field and find where this can have meaning for people in their lives and their communities, they're going to come into the humanities. So these things will work together.
Well, that's very encouraging to hear. Cristine, did you want to comment, or?
I think just to say that you kind of stacked the decks, and who you had on the dais to talk about are the arts and humanities in crisis. But an article that I was reading recently is interesting, and it said that really what you're looking at in the next 30 to 50 years is the automation of automation, and therefore the best preparation, if you will, for having a career in the world is to be focused on critical thinking and arts and humanities. I didn't look at the source for that article, so I don't know if the deck was stacked there, but it was an interesting pushback, I guess, if you will, to the idea that it's either got to be STEM or it has to be arts and humanities, and I'm with Kevin. I think the balanced approach is really the way to go.
Well, you know, many times there are careers that seem to be so completely separate, but many people are working in jobs today that's a combination of what we would traditionally think as separate career fields or options. Mm-hmm. Now, to provide some encouragement to our students and even to some of our parents, what type of internship opportunities might you provide?
So at CNE, we have a really robust internship program for people who are operating at the college level for two reasons. One is because as CNE, we're really interested in bringing new leaders into the nonprofit sector, and so we take responsibility for training some of those new leaders. And number two, it's just really helpful for people who are at school to start to have some work experience before they graduate in order to be able to hit the ground running. And so we have a summer internship program, and we also have a academic internship program. The information about it is on our website, but what we really work hard to do is put together a balanced job description or workload that gives you the opportunity to learn new things and also gives us the opportunity to apply your skills to the work that we're doing.
Okay. Kevin?
We have opportunities in virtually every aspect of what we do at VFH, and I think of us as somewhat of a lab. If you happen to have a humanities major or are looking for a place to get the kind of office experience that Cristine was describing, we're a place to find that. We have internships in communications and marketing, the kind of administrative features of the work that we do, and we also have it kind of on the ground in the program aspects of what we do. So the book festival has always a cadre of interns that are helping us pull it off. Our radio shows, With Good Reason and Backstory, so that might be assisting with the research or editing. I think they're really very attractive opportunities that give you a dose of it so that you can go into, out in the world and have some work experience. We usually only ask about 10 hours a week. Most of our internships are unpaid. Occasionally we will apply for funds to help fund one. But I think the experience and the training are an excellent trade-off. And we will be there for the people who've come through the VFH afterward, if you need a reference or that kind of thing, to just let an employer know this is a person who really, we rely on our interns to pull off the complex things we do. So they get great experience and can still keep up their studies, and it's not too taxing on that. And I think for the trade in that, it's a great experience.
For the person who might be looking for a job, what qualities would make the best candidate?
What immediately comes to mind to me is being brave, having the willingness to ask questions and having the willingness to try something even though you're not really sure how to do it, and make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And so oftentimes we feel like in our first job when we come out of college that we have to have everything right, that we have to be working towards some mystical career path, and what that means is that we can't make mistakes along the way. And I'm much more interested in working with interns and staff members who are open to what we call adaptive learning. And that is working really hard towards a goal, but understanding that the mistakes get you farther in the long run than doing everything perfectly along the way. And I wish I'd known that when I graduated from college, so I'll start with that.
I think those are great attributes. I think being kind of coachable in those positions, to hear from a staff member when there might be a way you approach the work that could use a tweak. That's where you really pick up the things that will help you develop as a professional later in life. Be open to taking things on. I always found it interesting. Occasionally an intern would say, oh, that's kind of a lower level job. I've done that stuff. And they would often be describing the very things I do on a daily basis. And it's like, well, that is work. That is the nature of work. And so you got to get used to it. I did not start off as a chief operating officer. I was collecting the slips and crunching the data and putting things where they needed to go and filing things. And there's an aspect of that just to being organized and how you approach your work. So that kind of thing never will, it's not time misspent. You need to pay your dues a little bit, work your way up, and that's an okay thing. While we were saying, that there's not necessarily an existential threat to the arts and the humanities, funding is always something that we're constantly scrambling to find, and I think that is just worth knowing. It's not to say that it's not out there, but it takes work to kind of think about it. And one of the strengths right now of the Virginia Foundation is that we have tried and sought to diversify finding funding in a lot of different areas. Some of that is individual philanthropy, some of that comes through corporations and foundations, some of it is governmental, but I would say right now it would be painting the wrong picture to not think that it isn't constantly, we're working very hard to kind of keep those things together at all times. But as we said, the things that we have to offer are of value, and so it's just a matter of finding those relationships to connect up the people who want to support the kind of work that we do to the people who are doing the work. So,
why are volunteers so important to the nonprofit community?
Well, for the obvious reason that volunteers can help add capacity to an organization that they don't have and allow them to do more of the work that they're doing in the community. So the people power is the obvious reason. But another reason I think that's often not understood about nonprofits, I referenced it earlier, is that nonprofits only succeed when the community embraces them, because nonprofits require funding, oftentimes from individuals in the community. They require board members who are volunteers. That's a legal requirement for a nonprofit to be successful. And so volunteers really, the number of volunteers that you have willing to work with you in different ways really is a reflection of the health of your organization, and it's very different from how it works in the private sector. And so I would say that volunteers are important from a, can we get the job done standpoint, but they're also important if you're looking at working at a nonprofit, look at who their volunteers are and how robust a group of volunteers they have working with the organization, and I think that will help you know whether or not they're grounded in the community and whether they have sustainability.
oh, I think very, very well said. There's nothing to add to that. Where the money is not all the way there to get the job done, the volunteers come in and fill that gap. And if they're there to do it, it happens. And when they're not, it won't. And in business, as you were saying, that's the difference between deciding to stop that and go in a different direction. But what if education is what you're seeking to do? We're not going to stop that. We're going to have to find the ways to get it done. And the blessing of this particular community is there are a number of people who have time to give and are willing to give it. Some of them are in probably a financial capacity or a financial state where it's not a concern to them. That's not everyone's position. Some people find it as a way to get some training, develop skills. occasionally, when a job does open and they've been working hard for a program, we have hired people who have been volunteers because we know they're committed, they want to see it done. If we have the capacity suddenly to do it by virtue of the work that the volunteers have provided, we have more juice to go on. So.
And if I could just echo what Kevin says, one of the key things that I tell people who are coming to CNE and looking to either transition to working in the nonprofit sector or to get started with a career in the nonprofit sector, not all of us have the ability to volunteer and volunteer only. Many of us need to work to pay our bills. But if you can carve out some time to get some volunteer experience in an area that you think you might want to pursue, not only is it good education and learning for you to test your assumptions, but it also really is a key aspect of networking and networking for job hunting, because you can have the opportunity, if not to get a job that magically becomes available in the organization that you're working in, to be able to meet and know those people who will be able to provide references for you in working in other organizations. And remember, the nonprofit sector is all about the community. And so if you're engaged in the community in some way, that really translates across the sector. So I can't underestimate, I guess, the importance of that.
What advice would you give someone who's interested in a career working for a nonprofit or working for the arts and humanities?
Well, I think I would just congratulate them on following their heart at first. I think where work is meaningful, excellent things will happen. And people who care about the arts and the humanities shouldn't say, well, no, the prospects are gloomy, not going to do it. I think that's where the life that feeds you may be. So it's just research, find a kind of place that really means something to you, and keep going for it. In a way, I like to write, but I knew that wasn't going to pay my bills. I've still been able to write and do the jobs that I've kind of had. It's something I can do on the side. I wish there were more time for it, to be utterly frank, but that's okay. I've made the decisions. I'm happy with the work that I do. I'm happy to see the results of the work that I do. That is something that is kind of unquantifiable, that I think people will at some point in their life really crave. So it is perfectly right to find something that is meaningful to you and then find the way to make it happen.
And I guess I would just add that all careers are iterative, and so it is hard to break into any profession when you're starting out and you don't have a lot of practical experience, but it can be even a little bit harder to break into the nonprofit sector because there tend to be smaller organizations, that tends to be less turnover, and so I would say have patience and don't give up on that. Because once you are able to break into it, it can prove to be, and it certainly has for me, and sounds like for Kevin too, prove to be a very meaningful and lifetime career, and it's worth it.
Well, Cristine and Kevin, you are definitely change agents. You do great work, and our community is richer because of the work that you do. And so I want to thank you for the work that you do, and I want to thank you for being our guests. And this concludes our Eat and Meet Career Information session. Please join us next month, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.